Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Diary of Anne Frank. So, yeah, we are seeing a lot of a situation where many of the people they had known have been sent into lives of torture and everything else under the Nazis, and they're trying to survive. So, let's continue on here. Friday, April the 2nd, 1943. Dearest Kitty, oh my, another item has been added to my list of sins. Last night I was lying in bed waiting for Father to tuck me in and say my prayers with me when Mother came into my room, sat on my bed, and asked very gently, Anne, Daddy isn't ready. How about if I listen to your prayers tonight? No, Momsy, I replied. Mother got up, stood beside my bed for a moment, and then slowly walked toward the door. Suddenly she turned, her face contorted with pain, and said, I don't want to be angry with you. I can't make you love me. A few tears slid down her cheeks as she went out the door. I lay still, thinking of how mean it was of me to reject her so cruelly, but I also knew that I was incapable of answering her any other way. I can't be a hypocrite and pray with her when I don't feel like it. It just doesn't work that way. I felt sorry for Mother, very, very sorry, because for the first time in my life, I noticed she wasn't indifferent to my coldness. I saw the sorrow in her face when she talked about not being able to make me love her. It's hard to tell the truth, and yet the truth is that she's the one who's rejected me. She's the one whose tactless comments and cruel jokes about matters I don't think are funny have made me insensitive to any sign of love on her part. Just as my heart sinks every time I hear her harsh words, that's how her heart sank when she realized there was no more love between us. She cried half the night and didn't get any sleep. Father was has avoided looking at me, and his if his eyes do happen to cross mine, I can read his unspoken words. How can you be so unkind? How dare you make your mother so sad? Everyone expects me to apologize, but this is not something I can apologize for because I told the truth, and sooner or later, Mother was bound to find out anyway. I seem to be indifferent to Mother's tears and Father's glances, and I am because both of them are now feeling what I've always felt. I can only feel sorry for Mother, who will have to figure out what her attitude should be all by herself. For my part, I will continue to remain silent and aloof, and I don't intend to shrink from the truth because the longer it's postponed, the harder it'll be for them to accept it when they do hear it. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, April the 27th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, the house is still trembling from the after effects of the quarrels. Everyone is mad at everyone else. Mother and I, Mr. Von Don and Father, Mother and Mrs. Von Don. Terrific atmosphere, don't you think? Once again, Anne's usual list of shortcomings has been extensively aired. Our German visitors were back last Saturday. They stayed until 6. We all sat upstairs, not daring to move an inch. If there's no one else working in the building or in the neighborhood, you can hear every single step in the private office. I've got ants in my pants from having to sit still so long. Mr. Voskil has been hospitalized, but Mr. Kleiman's back at the office. His stomach stopped bleeding sooner than it normally does. He told us that the county clerk's office took an extra beating because the firemen flooded the entire building instead of just putting out the fire. That does my heart good. The Carlton Hotel has been destroyed. 2 British planes loaded with firebombs landed right on top of the German Officers Club. The entire corner of Vigelstraat and Single has gone up in flames. The number of airstrikes on German cities is increasing daily. We haven't had a good night's rest in ages, and I have bags under my eyes from lack of sleep. Our food is terrible. Breakfast consists of plain unbuttered bread and Erstadt's coffee. For the last 2 weeks, lunch has either been spinach or cooked lettuce with huge potatoes that have a rotten Swedish taste. If you're trying to diet, the annex is the place to be. Upstairs, they complain bitterly, but we don't think it's such a tragedy. All the Dutch men who have either fought or were mobilized in 1940 have been called up to work in prisoner of war camps. I bet they're taking this precaution because of the invasion. Yours, Anne. Saturday, May the 1st, 1943. Dearest Kitty, yesterday was Dussel's birthday. At first he acted as if he didn't want to celebrate it. But when Miep arrived with a large shopping bag overflowing with gifts, he was excited as a little kid. His darling Lotje had sent him some eggs, butter, cookies, lemonade, bread, cognac, spice cake, flowers, oranges, chocolate, books, and writing paper. He piled his presents on a table and displayed them for no fewer than 3 days. The silly old goat. You mustn't get the idea that he's starving. We found bread, cheese, jam, and eggs in his cupboard. It's absolutely disgraceful that Dussel, whom we've treated with such kindness, and whom we took in to save from the destruction, should stuff himself behind our backs and not give us anything. After all, we've shared all we had with him. But what's worse, in our opinion, is that he's so stingy with respect to Mr. Kleiman, Mr. Voskil, and Bep. He doesn't give them a thing. In Dussel's view, the oranges that Kleiman so badly needs for his sick stomach will benefit his own stomach even more. Tonight the guns have been banging away so much that I've already had to gather my belongings 4 times. Today I packed a suitcase with the stuff I'll need in case we had to flee, but as Mother correctly noted, where would you go? All of Holland is being punished for the workers' strikes. Martial law has been declared, and everyone is going to get 1 less butter coupon. What naughty children. I washed Mother's hair this evening, which is no easy task these days. You have to use a very sticky liquid cleanser because there's no more shampoo. Besides that, Mom's had a hard time combing her hair because the family comb had only 10 teeth left. Yours, Anne. Sunday, May the 2nd, 1943. When I think about our lives here, I usually come to the conclusion that we live in a paradise compared to the Jews who aren't in hiding. All the same, later on, when everything was returned to normal, I'll probably wonder how we, who always lived in such comfortable circumstances, could have sunk so low. With respect to manners, I mean. For example, the same oilcloth has covered the dining table ever since we've come here. After so much use, it's hardly what you'd call spotless. I do my best to clean it, but since the dishcloth is also purchased before we went into hiding and consists of more hose than cloth, it's a thankless task. The Von Dons have been sleeping all winter long on the same flannel sheet, which can't be washed out because detergent is rationed and in short supply. Besides, it's of such poor quality that it's practically useless. Father is walking around in frayed trousers, and his tie is also showing signs of wear and tear. Mama's corset snapped today and is beyond repair, while Margot is wearing a bra that's 2 sizes too small. Mother and Margot have shared the same 3 undershirts the entire winter, and mine are so small they don't even cover my stomach. These are all things that can be overcome, but I sometimes wonder, how can we, whose every possession, from my underpants to Father's shaving brush, is so old and worn, ever hope to regain the position we had before the war? Sunday, May the 2nd, 1943. The attitude of the annex residents toward the war. Mr. Von Don. In the opinion of us all, this revered gentleman has great insight into politics. Nevertheless, he predicts we'll have to stay here until the end of 43. It's a very long time, and yet it's possible to hold out until then. But who can assure us that this war, which has caused nothing but pain and sorrow, will then be over? And that nothing will have happened to us and our helpers long before that time? No one. That's why each and every day is filled with tension. Expectation and hope generate tension, as does fear. For example, when we hear a noise inside or outside the house, when the guns go off, and when we read new proclamations in the paper, since we're afraid our helpers might be forced to go into hiding themselves sometime. These days, everyone is talking about having to hide. We don't know how many people are actually in hiding. Of course, the number is relatively small compared to the general population, but later on we'll no doubt be astonished at how many good people in Holland were willing to take Jews and Christians with or without money into their homes. There are also an unbelievable number of people with false identity papers. Mrs. Von Don. When this beautiful damsel, by her own account, heard that it was getting easier these days to obtain false IDs, she immediately proposed that we each have one made, as if there were nothing to it, as if Father and Mr. Von Don were made of money. Mrs. Von Don is always saying the most ridiculous things, and her putti is often exasperated. But that's not surprising, because one day Curly announces, "When this is all over, I'm going to have myself baptized," and the next, "As long as I can remember, I've wanted to go to Jerusalem. I only feel at home with other Jews." Pim is a big optimist, but he always has his reasons. Mr. Dussel makes up everything as he goes along, and anyone wishing to contradict His Majesty had better think twice. In Albert Dussel's home, his word is law, but that doesn't suit Anne Frank in the least. What the other members of the Annex family think about the war doesn't matter. When it comes to politics, these four are the only ones who count. Actually, only two of them do, but Madame von Don and Dussel include themselves as well. Tuesday, May the 18th, 1943. Dearest Kit, I recently witnessed a fierce dogfight between German and English pilots. Unfortunately, a couple of Allied airmen had to jump out of their burning plane. Our milkman, who lives in Halfweg, saw four Canadians sitting along the side of the road, and one of them spoke fluent Dutch. He asked the milkman if he had a light for his cigarette, and then he told him the crew had consisted of 6 men. The pilot had been burned to death, and the 5th crew member had hidden himself somewhere. The German security police came to pick up the 4 remaining men, none of whom were injured. After parachuting out of a flaming plane, how can anyone have such presence of mind? Although it's undeniably hot, we have to light a fire every other day to burn our vegetable peelings and garbage. We can't throw anything into the trash cans because the warehouse employees might see it. One small act of carelessness and we're done for. All college students are being asked to sign an official statement to the effect that they sympathize with the Germans and approve of the new order. 80% have decided to obey the dictates of their conscience, but the penalty will be severe. Any student refusing to sign will be sent to a German labor camp. That's to become of the youth of our country if they've all got to do hard labor what's to become of the youth in our country if they've all got to do hard labor in Germany. Last night, the guns were making so much noise that Mother shut the window. I was in Pim's bed. Suddenly, right above our heads, we heard Mrs. Von Don leap up as if she'd been bitten by mousey. This was followed by a loud boom, which sounded as if a firebomb had landed beside my bed. "Lights! Lights!" I screamed. Pym switched on the lamp. I expected the room to burst into flames any minute. Nothing happened. We all rushed upstairs to see what was going on. Mr. and Mrs. Von Don had seen a red glow through the open window and thought there was a fire nearby. While she was certain our house was ablaze, Mrs. Von Don was already standing beside her bed with her knees knocking when the boom came. Dussel stayed upstairs to smoke a cigarette, and we crawled back into bed. Less than 15 minutes later, the shooting started again. Mrs. Von Don sprang out of bed and went downstairs to Dussel's room to seek the comfort she was unable to find with her spouse. Dussel welcomed her with the words, "Come into my bed, my child." We burst into peals of laughter. The roar of the guns bothered us no more. Our fears had all been swept away. Sunday, June the 13th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, the poem Father composed for my birthday is too nice to keep to myself. Since Pym writes his verses only in German, Margot volunteered to translate it into Dutch. See for yourself whether Margot hasn't done herself proud. It begins with the usual summary of the year's events and then continues. As youngest among us, but small no more, your life can be trying, for we have the chore of becoming your teachers, a terrible bore. We've got experience, take it from me, we've done all this before, you see. We know the ropes, we know the game, since time immemorial, always the same. One's own shortcomings are nothing but fluff, but everyone else's are heavier stuff. Fault finding comes easy when this is our plight, but it's hard for your parents, try as they might, to treat you with fairness and kindness as well. Nitpicking's a habit that's hard to dispel. When you're living with old folks, all you can do is put up with their nagging. It's hard, but it's true. The pill may be bitter, but down it must go, for it's meant to keep the peace, you know. The many months here have not been in vain, since wasting time goes against your grain. You read and study nearly all the day, determined to chase the boredom away. The more difficult question, much harder to bear, is what on earth do I have to wear? I've got no more pennies, my clothes are too tight, my shirt is a loincloth, I'm really a sight. To put on my shoes, I must cut off my toes. Oh dear, I'm plagued with so many woes. Margot had trouble getting the part about food to rhyme, so I'm leaving it out. But aside from that, don't you think it's a good poem? For the rest, I've been thoroughly spoiled and have received a number of lovely presents, including a big book on my favorite subject, Greek and Roman mythology. Nor can I complain about the lack of candy everyone had dipped into their last reserves. As the Benjamin of the annex, I got more than I deserve. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, June the 15th, 1943. Dearest Kitty, heaps of things have happened, but I often think I'm boring you with this dreary chit-chat, and you'd just as soon have fewer letters. So I'll keep the news brief. Mr. Voskil wasn't operated on for his ulcer after all. Once the doctors had him on the operating table and opened him up, they saw that he had cancer. It was in such an advanced stage that an operation was pointless. So they stitched him up again, kept him in the hospital for 3 weeks, fed him well, and sent him back home. But they made an unforgivable error. They told the poor man exactly what was in store for him. He can't work anymore, and he's just sitting at home, surrounded by his 8 children, brooding about his approaching death. I feel very sorry for him and hate not being able to go out. Otherwise, I'd visit him as often as I could to help take his mind off matters. Now the good man can no longer let us know what's being said or done in the warehouse, which is a disaster for us. Mr. Voskil was our greatest source of help and support when it came to safety measures. We miss him very much. Next month, it's our turn to hand over our radio to the authorities. Mr. Kleiman has a small set hidden in his home that he's given us to replace our beautiful cabinet radio. It's a pity we have to turn in our big Phillips, but when you in hiding, you can't afford to bring the authorities down on your heads. Of course, we'll put the baby radio upstairs. What's a clandestine radio when there are already clandestine Jews and clandestine money? All over the country, people are trying to get a hold of an old radio, but they can hand over instead of their morale booster. It's true, the reports from outside grow worse and worse. The radio, with its wondrous voice, helps us not to lose heart and to keep telling ourselves, cheer up, keep your spirits high, things are bound to get better. Yours, Anne. We'll go ahead and end this episode here. Yeah, so, bad news for Mr. Voskul. Mr. Dussel was hiding food he had. Yeah, you could see how the way some people are used to life in a certain way and how it causes them to kind of conflict when they're right on top of each other trying to hide, trying to keep safe. So yeah, it's one of them things. Excuse me, but yeah, it's yeah, and of course Anne's having those growing pains. She's at that point of life where she conflicting with her parents. Because while you're uh, at that point of life, the hormones really affect how you think and see things. Because, of course, your body's still developing. You got all these hormones running through you, changing everything. So everything's just all mixed up. And of course, she's conflicting with her parents because of this and, the pressures of trying to stay hidden and safe during the war. So you can see how difficult of a situation this is. But yeah. It's crazy. You really can see how much stress and tension it puts on everybody that's hiding in the annex. And then you have all these other stressors out there. Um, restrictions on supplies and food and unable to go out, spend time with friends. Yeah. It's tough. But 1943, war is still going on pretty strong. Of course, Europe won't see an end to fighting until early 45? Maybe late 44, early 45, something like that. And then, of course, later in 45, the dropping of the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end the war in the Pacific. I don't think Italy's been overtaken yet. They end up falling first because Mussolini gets overthrown. So that should be coming fairly soon, the downfall of Mussolini. And then it'll be a little bit... Well, we won't get to the downfall of Hitler because, of course, of what we know as the end result. That the people in hiding do get found before the war ends. And of course, what happens to Anne. But yeah, that's what we're looking at right now. But with that, as always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.